Welcome, and thank you for joining me on another photography adventure. Today we're in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm going to teach you how to photograph the flat irons like a professional photographer. In this video, I'm going to share with you how to compose an image of the flat irons a few different ways. I'm also going to share with you my own personal vision of how I wanted to photograph the flat irons. Well, without wasting too much time, let's go ahead and hit the trail behind me and go ahead and get to composition spot number 1. The flat irons are quite accessible in minutes away from downtown Boulder. The compositions I'll show you are located at the base of the mountains, and it's a dirt trail that's easily walkable. The first composition I want to walk you through is honestly my favorite composition of the flat irons. It's one of the classic images that you will probably see if you Google flat irons and flat iron photography. And I've seen a couple different variations, but the one that I found, the exact location that I'm standing at now, for me has the best subject separation and the best perspective of the flat irons. So let's dive into the composition and I'll show you what I mean. With this composition, I'm looking at a couple different things. One is the foreground. There's not a lot of interesting foreground elements in this shot or in this specific location, so I wanted to minimize that, but I still want to offer depth into the image. I'm able to do that with the rolling hills that you see. The next thing I am trying to look at with this composition are the peaks pushing past the background, so you have that really nice subject separation. There are a lot of photos that I've seen from this general area to get this perspective, and typically 1 or 2 of the peaks have really nice subject separation, but not all 5. This exact location gives you that subject separation for all 5 of the flat irons. The next thing I'm looking at is the sky. This is a sunrise shot, and it is beautiful the way that the light hits these rock formations. Because of the perspective of the flat irons and their triangular shape, the left side of the rocks are really beautifully illuminated, especially with that like nice pink and orange like warm glow that you get. And it leaves the backside in shadows. That looks really great because it gives depth to this composition even more. Now that I've showed you how to photograph the flat irons for this composition, let's go ahead and take a look at the shot. Isn't that just beautiful? I will admit I did do a sky replacement since there was just a blue sky, but don't worry, this is exactly the type of photograph you'd get if you had perfect weather. I'm such a sucker for black and white photography, I couldn't resist this late morning shot when these clouds appeared. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this composition. Would you shoot it this exact way, or would you modify it? Now that we've completed photographing the flat irons for this location, let's go ahead and check out some other compositions. All right, here's another composition spot where you can photograph the flat irons. I hope you have a tall tripod because you'll need it for this shot. I had to extend all the legs basically to get the perspective correct for this composition. So this is part of the main trail that takes you up into the flat irons. And what I really like about this composition is the leading line of the trail leading you to the flat irons. And I really like how it gives a nice S-shaped curve to it. I've taken a test shot so you can see the composition from this perspective. Again, this is a sunrise photograph and we are about an hour and a half after sunrise, so the lighting isn't super great, but at least you're able to see the perspective of the flat irons, the leading line of the trail, and some other elements that really help give this composition a lot of depth. To get the correct perspective, you really do need to have your camera pretty high so you have really nice separation of the trail itself. I don't want any parts where they're overlapping, which breaks that leading line to the flat iron. For this image, you have to shoot somewhat wide. I'm sitting at about 35 millimeters for the shot. Other than the leading line in this composition that gives depth, there are a couple other elements that I've placed to also help give this image more depth. The first being the rock on the bottom right of the frame. Right across from that, you have two more rocks, and then right past that, you have a fence. That, with the leading line of the trail, gives really nice depth into the composition. Now, the difference between the flat iron perspective from this location versus the first one that we photographed this morning, this only has two of the peaks that have been pushed past the background to give that subject separation. The flat iron 3, 4, and 5 don't have that same subject separation. But that's okay, because you get something else with this shot. You get the trail and you get the rocks, which help create more depth than that original image that I showed. All right, that about sums it up for this second composition spot. Let's go ahead and check out some other compositions that are closer to the parking lot. It is quite brisk and I don't like being really cold. So I had to break out the big jacket for this one. Off we go to the next location. The last composition I want to show you is right at the very entrance of the park to get into the flat irons. Behind me, you'll see a fence, and right past that are some larger boulders that I thought would be interesting to work into the foreground of this next composition. This third and final composition focuses on using a boulder in the foreground as a supporting element to the flat irons. What I find most interesting about this composition is really the juxtaposition between this smaller boulder and then the massive flat irons itself. They're both beautiful rock formations in their own, but one is much further away from the other, and the size difference is really interesting. Another thing to note from this location is that only the first flat iron on the right side of the frame will have better subject separation than the rest. And that's where the peak is poking out a little bit past the background. Let's go ahead and review the image so you can see the composition from this perspective.
I know, this isn't a great shot at all because the lighting is all wrong, but could you imagine how great this would look during sunrise?
Each composition shows the perspective of the flat irons a little bit differently. The first perspective is a very up close and personal view of the flat irons, where I was shooting between 50 to 75 millimeters. That one focused really on minimum foreground elements and just the flat irons itself, capturing that light and giving depth through the shadows of the rock formations itself. The second composition focused on the leading line of the trail, rocks, and fence to lead the viewer up to the flat irons. And that was shot at around 35 millimeter focal length. This third and final composition is shot much wider at about 24, although you could probably get away with doing something around 16 and capture a little bit more of the foreground. But it pushes the perspective of the flat irons further back into the frame. Well, that was a fun morning. I really enjoyed photographing the flat irons and walking you through a couple different composition spots. I really hope you've learned something in today's video. If you did, then please go ahead and give this a like. And let me know in the comments which composition you preferred the most. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.